Hello, this is Christy from 52hider 3D with a tutorial on how to get started by using the compositor or the node editor. When I started using Blender about 2 years ago, it took me a long time to get into the compositor purely because it looks frightening, but after a while I managed to get the hang of it through a couple of tutorials. So it's not as bad as it looks. So this is what we're going to be doing today. I have this render of a torch, and you can download the starting file, link in the description. We're going to take this fairly bland looking image and turn it into something a bit more like this. Black background, lens flare, all this sort of stuff. So let's go to Blender and have a look. So this is the file. Just everything is on one layer. A few lamps here, there, and everywhere. An area lamp and a spot lamp coming out of the torch and the camera. So before we start on compositing, when you do compositing, you're going to do a lot of re-rendering again and again and again. So let's just turn down the render sizes, just do 25%, and under the samples I'm going to turn it down to 100, and I'll save this as like so. Okay, so let's render this quickly. Okay, that's horrible quality render, but don't worry, we'll get it looking better in a bit. Actually, I think we could ramp this up to 50%. That's a bit better. Okay, so to start with, let's go to the node editor like this. Make sure you're on the first of these buttons here, the render layers one, and click on use nodes. And we press home. That's strange. Okay. Usually a couple of nodes pop up straight away, but we're going to have to add them in manually because it doesn't appear to be working. So press Shift A to add a new node. Choose Input, Render Layers. And we have this node here. And this is just the scene as it is rendered, and you can pipe that image out to whatever you want. So let's add another node and choose Output and Composite. And now you can see there is an image on this render layers and an image on this composite node. And if we drag a line between them, they link up. And this is basically the default setup. So if you didn't use nodes at all, this is what you'd get. You'd get render layer, compositor, all just set up like that. Fairly simple. Okay, so now that we've got that, if you render it, absolutely nothing has changed since the last render. But what we can do is if we add a new node, and I'm just going to choose a distort and rotate node. Got this node, and if you move it over to here, you'll see the line goes orange. If you click on there, it will drop it right in the middle of them. And if we then choose to rotate it by 55 degrees, we then render it. It will render it as normal, and then right at the last minute it will rotate it by 55 degrees. And this is just how it works. This renders the actual render layer, then the image goes through to whatever you've got in the middle and goes out to the composite node, which displays as a final render. So let's delete this rotate node. What we're going to need to do is actually have more than one render layer and this involves splitting your scene into a couple of different renders. So let's split the view and go back to the 3D viewport, and let's select the lens and the bulb and the spotlight. Press M to move them to the layer just below there. And we can turn both those layers on now. And then go over to the Render Layers panel on the inspector, or the Properties window. I think it's called the Properties window here. So we've got one render layer already, which is this one. So let's rename this Main and add a new render layer and call this one Lens. Under Main, you can see it has all these layers selected, which means it's going to render all these layers. So let's just click on this one so it only renders that one layer that has all that on it. And let's go down to the Lens layer, and it also renders everything. So let's click on this one, and so that it only renders that one. We also want it to mask out if any of the lens is hidden by any of the main layer. We don't want it to be rendered because that'll mix up in the mixing process. So if we mask this layer like that, anything that is behind part of that first layer won't be rendered on the lens layer. So now if we go back to the node editor, add in another render layers node, and we can choose from this drop down box Lens. So now we've got two render layers, and if we plug that in there, but we can't plug two render layers into the compositor, into the composite node. It just doesn't work. So we're going to have to mix these two together by using an alpha over node. So go to Add, Color, Alpha Over. We can drag this onto here like this. And what this does is takes in two images like this, and takes the alpha, or the transparency of one, and checks to see if it's transparent, and it basically overlays one over the other. So let's render that again and see what happens here. So it's going to render the first render layer and then the second render layer. For some reason it hasn't rendered the second render layer properly. I wonder why that is. I know. It's because we haven't got both these layers turned on in the scene. We need to have both of them turned on in the scene for it to render it properly. And that's working a lot better. Okay, so you see it has taken it's compared these two images and mixed them so that it's this one is on the top, but if it's got a transparent bit, it shows through this. Don't know how much sense that makes, but you'll get the hang of it in a bit. Okay, so we've got these two layers, and what this now means is that we can add effects to one layer without adding them to the other. So let's go back to this layer, and you'll see we've got this sort of glow around the edge. We've got the streaks, and the actual lens is sort of blurred a bit. So let's do the blurring of the lens first. So let's add a filter node and blur. So a blur node, and change the blur type here to fast Gaussian. I don't know why you should choose fast Gaussian, but everyone always does. And now we're going to do a little trick. If we split this view again and select the UV image editor from here, and we're going to add a new node over here. We're going to choose output viewer, and if we can select this again from the alpha over node and drag it into the image of the viewer. So you can, any output point can have more than one thing coming out of it, but an input can't have more than one going into it, if that makes sense. So now if we select viewer node from the UV image editor, just re-render this, like so. You see anything we do automatically pops up in the viewer node without us having to re-render it. So under the fast Gaussian, let's just blur this. I think just by 1 pixel each way will do fine. Yep, 1 pixel each way should be fine. So we've just blurred the lens slightly. But we also want to add in the streaks. Now to do this, we're going to have to take another output from here, add the streaks to it, and then mix it back together again. So let's add a new node, and it's going to be filter and glare. And you can choose a few different types of glare, and we're going to choose the streaks version and drag the image from the lens render layer into the image there. And we're also going to add in another node called a mix node. So we're going to put it in here, and we're going to drop those in like that. And this will allow us to mix these two versions. So one render layer, it is split in two. One version has the glare applied to it, one the blur, and then they get mixed back together again on this node, and then mixed with the actual torch layer on this node and out to these nodes. So we just need to change a few things in this glare node. First, if we change this to 0, then we only get we only get the glare rather than the blur. So let's turn down this a bit. And this isn't working very well. Turn down the fade a bit. Yeah. And if you change that to 0.5, it will do both equally. But you see, because when it creates glare, it's sort of not quite really there, if that makes sense. It probably doesn't. But there's a slight problem. It looks when it creates the glare, it seems to create it with it's almost a transparent thing. That means when you put it into an alpha over node, it cuts it out. So I'm just going to go away and see if I can find a way of sorting that out. Okay, so I think the easiest thing to do will be to make all the effects and then start mixing them up how we want to mix them. So let's cut this and delete that node and add in a new node, and we want it also to be a glare node. This. Instead of streaks, we're going to choose fog glow and drag in that as well. And if we bring the fog glow into, in fact we can just bring that directly into the viewer node without having to go all the way. And if if we uncheck use alpha, we can see the glow taking place. So if we turn down the threshold a bit, bring down the size, bring about like that, it's quite good. But the glow on a torch always looks sort of slightly blue and cold light, whereas that looks perfectly white. So let's just change that to high quality. So let's add in another node, and this one wants to be an RGB curves node. And if you've ever used Photoshop or anything like that, you'll be familiar with how this works. You have all the different channels here, so color, red, green and blue, and you can add points to this and just tweak the color value very slightly. I'm just gonna do some tweaking here. That looks a lot better. So we've got four different things we need to mix up. So we're just going to have to start experimenting with the best way to mix them all. So let's for a start add the lens with the glare to the torch. So let's use a mix node. Like that. Let's just connect up this to the viewer so we can see what we're doing. And we're going to use a blend type called add, and this very simply takes the second value and adds the color to the first value. So if we turn down the factor amount a bit, it will not add quite so much. That works quite well like that. Okay, so now we need to mix the blur and the streaks together. So if we then add another mix node, and now connect this one up to the viewer instead. And we can use an add again. Actually, I think we should flip these around so one goes in like that. If we turn down the mix on the glare slightly to -0.6, it'll work a lot better. Okay, so we've got now two things that we just need to mix together. So add another mix node. Let's drag these both in and out to the viewer node. And I'm not sure what sort of blend type we'll need this time. So maybe choose add, see how well that works. That actually works quite well. Looks a bit bright in the central bit though, so let's have a look. Just bring that back into the viewer there. That one looks quite nice, and that's yeah, that works quite well. Multiply with a factor of 0.6, and that value yeah, and if we check that button, it looks a bit nicer. I'm not sure what that button really does, but seems to look nicer. So that's it, pretty much done. Maybe the streaks aren't coming out quite enough. Maybe it'd be better to flip this around so that the streaks went into that one and the glare goes into this one. No, maybe not. It's just really a matter of trial and error and seeing how it all works out. It'd be nice to have a bit more streaks. Flip those around, see how that works. Let's try and multiply for that one. Well, don't seem to be able to get the streaks very well. You could play around with this quite a lot more and add way more complicated stuff to this, but for now I think that's about all. So I'll just quickly recap on how the compositor works. Each node adds something or does something to the image, and then they can all get mixed back down to this composite node, which we need to remember to add in at the end of the chain. So I hope that's sort of sorted out the compositor for you. Feel free to post any questions in the comments section down below, or on my Facebook page 52hider3d, or on my Google Plus page. I'd like to see what you've come up with, and so you can also post that on Facebook. So thanks very much for watching. See you next time.